Allicia stood in a field of tall grass under a warm summer sun, her small hands clasped around her grandfather's. The air smelled of fresh earth and wildflowers, and his deep voice resonated with a warmth she had almost forgotten. "One day, you'll find your way to Blackwood," he said, crouching down to look her in the eye. "And when you do, you'll need to be brave. There's more to our family than you know, Allicia. More than I can explain now." The dream shifted abruptly. The bright sunlight dimmed, replaced by the eerie grey of twilight. Her grandfather's features blurred as shadows crept across the landscape. He was speaking, but his words were distant, distorted, swallowed by the wind. She reached out to him, but he faded away, leaving her alone in the darkened field. Allicia jolted awake, her heart pounding. The morning sunlight streaming through the bedroom window did little to dispel the unease lingering from the dream. She swung her legs off the makeshift bed she'd set up, her bare feet brushing against the cool wooden floor. The house was quiet, but its silence felt heavy, as if it were holding its breath. 3 days had passed since her arrival in Blackwood, and she'd yet to make much progress settling in. A quick trip to the local grocery store had introduced her to Mrs. Hargrove, an elderly woman who ran the shop with a sharp wit and a knowing look that made Allicia uneasy. Other than that, she had kept to herself, her time consumed by organizing her belongings and avoiding the more unsettling parts of the house. Today, however, she planned to reopen the office. The sun was shining, and the town seemed calmer, less oppressive than usual. She dressed quickly, her thoughts lingering on the dream as she made her way downstairs. Her grandfather had always been a mystery, a figure both distant and enigmatic, but the dream felt too vivid to dismiss as mere nostalgia. She was tying her boots when a sudden knock at the front door startled her. It was firm but not aggressive, as if the person on the other side knew exactly how to demand attention without seeming threatening. She hesitated, her instincts flaring. Visitors weren't something she'd anticipated, especially not this early in the morning. When she opened the door, a man stood on the porch. He was tall and thin, his face partially obscured by the brim of a wide hat. His clothes were worn but neat, and his pale eyes seemed to study her with unsettling precision. "Miss Raine?" he asked, his voice calm but carrying an edge she couldn't quite place. "Yes," she replied cautiously. "Can I help you?" The man smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I believe you can. May I come in?" Allicia hesitated, her fingers tightening on the edge of the door. The man's pale eyes held hers with an intensity that felt almost intrusive, as if he could see through the carefully built walls she had constructed around herself. The weight of his presence was oppressive, his calm demeanor doing little to soothe the unease crawling beneath her skin. "Who are you?" she asked, her tone sharp but measured. The man tipped his hat slightly, revealing a thin, angular face. "My name is Emmett Devereux. I'm here on behalf of someone who believes you might be able to help with an unusual matter." The words hung in the air like smoke, vague and laden with implication. Allicia's detective instincts flared to life, dissecting the subtle tension in his voice and the deliberate vagueness of his statement. She glanced over his shoulder, scanning the empty street for signs of anyone else. Blackwood remained eerily still, the faint hum of the wind the only sound accompanying the stranger's words. "I'm not taking on any clients right now," she replied, her voice firm. "You'll have to come back later." "With all due respect, Miss Raine," Emmett said, stepping closer, "I'm afraid this matter can't wait, and frankly I don't believe you'll want to ignore it." She studied him, her mind racing through possibilities. He didn't look dangerous, but something about him, the meticulous way he held himself, the slight edge in his voice, hinted at an undercurrent of desperation. Against her better judgment she stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter. Emmett's movements were deliberate as he crossed the threshold, his boots thudding softly against the wooden floor. He removed his hat and held it in his hands, his pale eyes scanning the room as if cataloguing every detail. Allicia closed the door behind him, feeling the weight of the moment settle heavily in her chest. "I'll give you 10 minutes," she said, motioning for him to sit at the small dining table she'd hastily cleared the day before. "Start talking." Emmett nodded and took a seat, his long fingers clasping the brim of his hat. "Thank you," he said, his voice low. "I'll get straight to the point. There's a situation in town. Something that's frightened a lot of people. It's quiet now, but I fear it won't stay that way for long." Allicia raised an eyebrow. "What kind of situation?" "Disappearances," he replied, his voice dropping further. "People vanish without a trace. No signs of struggle, no explanations. Just gone. And then there's the house." She leaned forward slightly, her curiosity piqued despite herself. "What house?" Emmett hesitated, his gaze flickering to the shadows pooling in the corners of the room. "There's an old mansion at the edge of town. Most folks avoid it. Been abandoned for decades or so, they say. But lately, lights have been seen in the windows at night. Strange noises, voices even. Some people have gone to investigate, but they don't come back." Alicia's heart sank. The mention of an ominous house and unexplained disappearances stirred memories of her dream and her grandfather's cryptic warnings. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms as she studied Emmett. "Why come to me?" she asked. "I'm new here. Surely there are others, the police, for example, who are better equipped to handle this." He shook his head. "The police won't go near it. Blackwood. It's not like other towns. People here know better than to meddle in certain things. But you're different. You're not from here. And I was told you have a knack for uncovering the truth, no matter how unpleasant it might be." Allicia frowned, her mind spinning. She didn't like the way this man seemed to know so much about her, but she couldn't deny that his story tugged at something deep inside her, a mix of curiosity, dread, and a nagging sense of purpose. "Who sent you?" she asked, her voice sharp. Emmett's lips tightened. "Someone who knows what you're capable of. That's all I can say for now." She didn't like it, but she also couldn't ignore it. The pieces of the puzzle were too enticing, too eerily aligned with the strange pull she'd felt ever since arriving in Blackwood. "Fine," she said finally. "I'll look into it. But if you're wasting my time, Mr. Devereux, you'll regret it." He stood, his pale eyes glinting with something that might have been relief. "You won't regret it, Miss Raine. I promise." As he left, the heavy silence of the house returned, wrapping around her like a shroud. Allicia stared at the door long after it closed, her thoughts a tangled web of questions and suspicions. Whatever she had stepped into, it was clear that Blackwood and its secrets weren't about to let her go.